Not feeling super well today, but I'm okay for the time being. Just had some awesome noodles. Um, I think what I want to talk today about is how, well, this is gonna sound super, like, tacky, but I don't care, is the idea of, it's that phrase, silence is violence. Um, as I've said before, for the past 15 years, a certain amount of online abuse and stalking I went through as a kid, which went unreported to me and culminated in two different instances of being drugged and assaulted, and multiple instances of sexual voyeurism and trafficking, identity fraud, that sort of thing, has become this big, ugly, open secret. And one of the reasons why MAID is the only choice I have left, or at least for the time being, it seems like the only foreseeable choice I have left, is that I've learned if people are willing to stand by and watch you be raped as a kid, then they're probably going to be willing to stand by and watch you be raped or even participate in it as an adult. Um, it's a really long, slow, horrifying exercise that is severely damaging my mental health and my ability to function as an adult, because throughout most of my life, the cycle has been, let's watch Jacob be abused or sexually abused or profited from, and let's keep it under wraps while criticizing what he does. Let's make fun of him for his pain. Let's tell him he's not a man. Let's tell him nobody cares. And let's tell him it's in the past. Eventually, there will come a point where months or years after the fact, people genuinely believe that they have the right to walk away from what they've swept under the rug. Because in Canada and most countries, if you don't have evidence, or witnesses, then it's difficult for police to take on your case. I was on the phone a day or two ago with the police, and I plan on trying again and following up because my phone signal kept cutting out, because of course it did. And um, I was trying to explain at length about how the years of stalking and technological abuse had culminated in several instances of assault, and that, based on what I went through at a homeless shelter, which I'll explain shortly, it was the Oak Center shelter in Fredericton, that I strongly believe the voyeurism and or the sexual abuse are still being broadcasted, possibly even as I speak to you right now, which is a terrifying thing to think about. Begging for your life while the people who put you in that position watch you beg for entertainment. This idea that you can hold back an entire person's life, their rape, their assault, the trafficking, and just go keep living your life like everything is normal. And then by the time they realize what's happening because of their learning disabilities, their lack of life skills, the isolation, their lack of resources, it's now all on them to just get over it. Whereas during the time during childhood and my teenage years, my 20s, where I was negotiating with my rapists for my own safety, I was dealing with blackmail from people who do way worse things on a daily basis, where I had to constantly deal with accusations of voluntarily spreading disease, accusations of being schizophrenic, all of that, that the huge impact that made on my future feasibility, my life skills, my ability to function, is now in the past. And I can snap my fingers and magically download the decades of information that I still desperately need access to in order to survive, protect myself from rape, and identify and isolate and combat trafficking. That these are just basic human qualities of life, basic human rights, which, well, no one wanted to help you. Nobody cares, it's in the past. You are still very much vulnerable to and a desirable target to your abusers. And this is your present, this is your future. and we are actively withholding the information you need to start proper law enforcement, as is your right as a Canadian citizen. But please just pretend it's not happening, and please, Jacob, go die. I don't know if I'll be able to make the tone of today's video funny or pleasant, not like the other ones really were either, but I can't wrap my head or my spirit around that fully. Your friends and family members have been standing by and allowing people to commit some of the most disgusting and discriminatory and homophobic and sexually aggressive acts against you your entire life. And you'd better give up your right to have sex without being monitored. You'd better give up your right to masturbate without being monitored. You'd better give up your right to work without being monitored, because you don't have the resources to fight back. We're withholding the information that would make it possible for you to fight back. And therefore, if you achieve any kind of financial success, sexual stimulation, or social integration, it's our property to encapsulate and sell and observe and draw data from. And because you can't fight back, that means that you're consenting to what we're doing to you. Sometimes I have to tell people, okay, imagine me holding down a woman or a man or a child and doing that to them and laughing at them and telling them, go masturbate so we can watch you and make sure you're not doing anything wrong. Imagine me holding down a child and laughing at that child and saying that because you can't fight back, you're consenting to what I'm doing to you. I've tried several times to ask my mother, my stepfathers, my father, my stepmother about what's happening, and all they come back with is weird jokes about dog breeding and their friends in the news and law enforcement, and insinuations of karma and, well, what lesson did you have to learn from being raped? And the longer this goes on, the more that my family's friends smile at me up and down like they own me, the more that they make direct verbal jokes about the date rape and the voyeurism, the more I'm really genuinely starting to believe that my family is at least aware of or perhaps participating in the abuse, and that a lot of my friends and roommates have as well. It makes people genuinely angry when I ask questions or when I talk about it. And at the homeless shelter, the Oak Center, I had people walking up to me to describe what happened on the nights where I was drugged. I had people talking about this weird account that had been stolen, and Jacob would be rich if he could leave the past behind, but then they refused to elaborate on anything. At the smoker's table, there was a little wooden bench outside where people would smoke their cigarettes and stuff. And people would regularly, like, quote past conversations I had years ago and then talk about me being raped. And there was one night where I was sitting with my sketchbook on the table. I finished a smoke with my spare hand, threw away the butt, and then I let my other hand drop into my lap. And the whole table started freaking out, and one guy started shining his phone flashlight under the table at my lap and hand. And I'm just sitting there looking at everybody like, is anybody gonna tell me what's going on? Like, what's going on? And then they just ignored me and kept treating it as though I was about to reach for a loaded gun or something. And this went on for 2 straight months. At that shelter in Fredericton, there was one day where another client, she had a 6-pack of coolers, and she gave me one, and I drank it with her on property, which that's totally fair that I got banned for 48 hours. They told me straight up, like, you're not supposed to have any alcohol on property. If you drink, do it off property. So me having that cooler, going to the library, and coming back, I understand why they got me out for 48 hours. So I spoke to my uncle. I booked a little motel room. I think it was the Norfolk Inn. I could be wrong, but it was a little motel off the highway in Fredericton. And I figured, well, I've got 2 days to myself. I'm alone in a motel room. Why not get a little bit of drugs and party by myself? Feel like a rock star for 48 hours before going back to reality. Um, I ended up getting my stuff from someone who was in the permanent residence program, and there was this other guy who I was originally going to pick up from. And when I changed to the other dealer, the first guy started acting weird, and he was like pacing up and down the hall and texting. And I just felt so wrong in my gut. So I went to the motel though. I tried not to think about it. And as I'm there, there's two other former residents of the motel who've booked a room directly next to mine. And one of the guys, he asked me, "Oh, do you mind if I come hang out in your room for a bit?" And I said politely, like, "Oh no, I'm just gonna stay by myself." And this detail is important, but I went into my room, and before I had even used any of the drugs, I could overhear people in the next room. Before, while I was still sober, I could overhear people in the next room saying, "Oh, this guy's he's getting set up. He's gonna go to prison. He's gonna be gang raped in prison." And as someone who's already been through that, that is the most deeply terrifying, triggering thing. But I literally just tried telling myself, like, they're talking about someone else. They have to be talking about someone else. Otherwise, I'm sure someone would have busted me as soon as I made the purchase and booked my room, right? The first night kind of goes without event, and then the second night they're talking for hours, and I mean hours. Like, "Oh, this guy's gonna get busted. We've got him set up. As soon as he steps out the door, they're gonna get him." And so I felt in that moment like, okay, if I dispose of everything but I leave residue, or if they kick in the door and they confiscate it, and I have to go through trial for possession, I end up in prison. I'm gonna have to spend a couple months up to a few years being raped again in the exact same way I have been on multiple times before. And I thought, okay, well, they can arrest me for being intoxicated, but not for possession. And so I thought if I eat every single thing all at once, then there won't be any way for them to swab a surface. There won't be any way for them to search my bags or person. It was a desperate moment caused by the interference of other individuals where I genuinely thought the risk of intoxication charges or an overdose was far less than the risk of being sent to prison by the same people I'd been purchased drugs from and being assaulted until I was released. Within about 10 or 20 minutes, an overdose started. My eyeballs and my limbs were twitching so violently I could not control them. I had to stumble out of my door, and thank God there was a different person a few doors down having a cigarette outside, and he actually waited for me while the ambulance arrived. And as soon as my overdose started while I was inside the motel room, I could hear the girl in the next room go, "Oh shit, this is bad. He wasn't supposed to do that." So, within seconds of the ambulance being called, the paramedics had not arrived yet, and a cop wheels into the fucking driveway so fast. He throws open his door, seatbelt dangling, door wide open. He's like, "Oh my god, are you okay? It's okay, I don't care about the drugs." And I'm sitting there, I'm like, "Yeah, the paramedics are already on their way." And he goes, "Oh, okay, so you're gonna be fine?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, it's okay, don't worry about the drugs." And then he gets in his car and speeds off. All the way off. The cop left before the paramedics arrived, which I'm pretty sure is not supposed to happen, but I could be wrong. I'm not fully informed about protocols. Um, they got me to the hotel, or not the hotel, sorry, the hospital after, and they were asking me the basic coherency questions. Are you hearing things? No. Are you seeing things? No. Although, while I was still in the parking lot, they had these paving stones, and I didn't have my contact lenses in. So, the paving stones in the dark of night with my eyeballs rapidly twitching, I actually thought it was a little line of beavers until the guy said, "No, those are just paving stones." And I looked more closely, and I'm like, okay. But that wasn't a hallucination so much as low lighting, no contact lenses, and rapidly seizuring eyeballs. So they asked, no audio hallucinations? No. No visual hallucinations? No. What day is it? It's November the 2nd or 3rd. What country or province are you in? This is New Brunswick, Canada. What's your name? Jacob Hickey, blah, 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 blah. And I was passing all the coherency questions, and even though my limbs were kind of seizuring pretty hard, I was obeying everything the nurses and the paramedics told me to. Um, she put this pre-IV drip in my arm and then a extraction spile in the other arm, and she started to take like little blood vials with green and red color coding on top, and she said the first few were for drug and contaminant testing, and then she gave the other nurse a really strange look, and the other nurse nodded and started hooking up this big IV bag full of milky white fluid. I have a documented medical history of extreme aversion to opiates and sedatives and that sort of thing. I actually had a full blown schizophrenic meltdown in the hospital on that self-administered morphine pump drip after I had ankles inserted into my leg when I was 17 or 18 back in 2011 or 2012. And so I was trying to explain to the other nurse, like, I'm here, I'm coherent mentally, I'm just very scared and my body is seizuring. Can you please explain what you're putting into my arm? And she said, it's going to help you. Like, it's going to help you calm down. And I said, okay, but is this a sedative or is this an anti anxiety fluid of some sort? And I'm trying to actively explain to this woman I have a documented medical history. There are records in Ontario of psychotic reactions to sedatives and opiates. But she wouldn't let me explain and she started pumping them in. Then the nurse on my left took out 4 additional vials with a different color coding. They were shades of red and pink. And I looked at her and I asked, I'm okay with you testing my blood, but can you please tell me what those are for? At which point she said, oh, I don't think you're coherent enough to understand what's happening anymore. And then the IV drip continued being pumped, and that's the last thing I remember. The next day, I was so incoherent because of obviously what had happened the night before, but also because they failed to explain what sedative or opiate or whatever it was they pumped into my arm. And so I don't have any lasting bodily damage that I know of yet. I did not die, which I'm thankful for. So please do not misconstrue this. I am eternally grateful to the Horizon Health Network in Fredericton, the Dr. Everett Chalmers Hospital. I'm not accusing the nurses necessarily of malpractice that resulted in serious harm. But it seems so odd to me that despite obeying the coherency questions and genuinely trying to let them know I have a medical aversion to certain substances, and her explaining what the first 3 blood extraction vials were for, she suddenly decided that the other blood vials were no longer within my right of informed consent. Um, I filed 2 legal requests for the results to be returned, and when they gave me back my forms, they didn't even have the drugs on the form work. Despite her saying the first 3 vials were for drugs and contaminants, and then not explaining what the next 4 were for, the only thing they tested was my red and white blood cell count, my blood sugar, and they didn't even have the toxicology showing the drugs I overdosed on. That was completely absent. And they didn't have any of the other results from the blood vials. So I still, to this day, will never know what the extra vials were for. Um, I tried following up at another hospital in Sackville, New Brunswick that was under the same Horizon Health Network. And as I was in the waiting room after filing my legal request and waiting for the results, one of the desk nurses was pulled aside by someone who looked like a manager. And then he pulled her to the back of the waiting room, pointed at me several times, and I could hear him say, I don't want him here. And it scares me that on so many occasions, my life has almost been claimed directly or indirectly, both by the abuse against me and my attempts to deal with the abuse against me, and that people still expect me to be okay with it. The constant throwing of nobody cares at you when people clearly care well enough to follow me from a homeless shelter to a motel, where people care enough to commit voyeurism, where people care enough to profit from me, where people care enough to try and destroy my character in ways that have gotten me trafficked and raped and on several occasions almost ended my life. They have to pick a side. If nobody cares what happens to a male victim, then why do people care enough to do that to him? Pick a side and stop contradicting yourself is what I want to say to my abusers. The amount of gaslighting that goes into it when your own friends and family will take the side of your abusers and then they'll realize they were wrong and then they'll refuse to give you the information you could use to remedy your situation, even if it's just issuing a cease and desist order to a couple people. The cognitive dissonance, the mental illness, the abuse that it indicates for people to constantly get in your business at the request of your abusers, turn around, realize they were wrong, and not explain anything that happened, when it progressively goes from getting you bullied, to stalked, to raped, to trafficked, to almost killed in a hotel room because you thought you had to eat your drugs to avoid a possession charge and being raped in prison. the escalating level genuinely feels like it won't end. That I can't even seek services at a hospital, motel, or homeless shelter without people joining in for fun or clout or money or whatever people keep doing this for. The constant, contradiction of nobody cares, it's in the past, but please let us keep doing this to you for some reason that we refuse to explain. And then the accusations they use to justify it are never actually brought to the police or brought to court. And then they tell you to do something about it. And the police tell you they can't even help you because the people involved are withholding too much information. It it's murder. For the time being, and I am pressing it further with law enforcement, I am going to try and follow up more. But for the time being, I don't see any foreseeable way to have my human rights respected besides euthanasia. And that deeply, genuinely horrifies me. And people keep saying no one wants to deal with the police. No one wants to get involved. It's drama, it's chaotic, it's a sad story. Just get over it. And then every time you get over it and you go to a different city or province, people follow you and you get assaulted again, and then you almost die again. And they say get over it, so you move to another city in another province and you have teenagers pointing you out in public and laughing at footage of you being assaulted. And then you go to another city in another province and you have people accusing you of crimes which nobody has brought to court. And each and every single time, people keep walking away with your body, with your mind, with your money, with your sex life, with your job. And this whole nobody cares bit starts to really seem like a taunt or a brag or an illusion. Because clearly someone or a few people care if they're willing to take it that far. I, like a lot of people in this situation, am still human, but I genuinely don't see any other way out besides euthanasia. And for all the people who keep telling me that they don't want to get hurt, they don't want to get involved, it feels selfish and whiny to me to say this, but I have to say it, is maybe if someone in your life is being physically and sexually and chemically and legally abused in front of you and all over the internet, and they're publicly begging for their life, like they're not begging for $1 million, they're not begging for a yacht covered in gold on the ocean, they're not begging for a submachine gun so they can go hurt a school full of people. They're begging to live life as a human being. They're begging to be held accountable in the right legal way, and they're begging for a chance to also do the same with some of their abusers, not even all of them. And you don't want to get involved, but you'll watch this progress to the point where a person dies, and now you might be subpoenaed to tell what you've witnessed on the forced self-unaliving of a sexual minority after years of trafficking and stalking, and great passed off as vigilante justice. And you want to tell them that nobody cares and it's in the past. That was a nice voice crack. You want to tell them that nobody cares and it's in the past while it's still going on and while they're still living with the effects of it. Make it make sense. I guess my advice to anybody watching this, all 2 or 3 of you, is if you're ever in a position where you know someone personally, I'm not talking about me in this case, but if you know someone personally and you are watching them publicly beg for their life, like to publicly beg for their life and for the evidence necessary to properly investigate their own abuse, and your gut reaction is, I don't want to get involved, I don't have time to testify, I don't have time to be a witness, I don't want to get hurt by the people abusing them, and you're watching them slowly be unalived by other people and forced into self-unaliving for their own protection, tell the truth before, because if you have to add manslaughter to that charge, or neglectful death, or whatever the equivalent charge would be, if that's the charge you have to add to the end of it, all of it, like a cherry on top of a sundae, I think you're kind of going against your own intuition when you say that you don't want to get involved. I think that because of the internet, this type of scenario is getting way more common every day. Male, female, black, white, blah, blah, blah. And that's, I think, why I started the video off with the really predictable, overdone phrase, silence is violence. It's terrifying to be in a position where every time you cry for help, people pour gasoline and set it on fire and then they blame you for the damage. Every time you call law enforcement or email a professional, people set it on fire and then they blame you for the damage. And every time you try and run away, get rid of your phone, delete your emails, new social media or no social media, every time you hold down a job and stay sober, people will still recruit teenagers to sexually humiliate you while you're standing behind your desk job at Tim Hortons and Capillet. And then they tell you to get over it and leave it behind because nobody cares. Like, the psychological deconstruction that happens from 15 plus years of sexual abuse and technological abuse and gaslighting is really starting to get to me. And I'm normally one of the strongest, most sarcastic, carefree, mumbo jumbo people I know. But I think there comes a certain point where so much hatred would become not strategic, even for a narcissist, even for a psychopath. There comes a certain point where such blatant, open, messy hatred would become silly and not strategic and foolish for even a psychopath. Like, you followed a man from a homeless shelter to try and catch him doing drugs and jerking off in a motel room, scared him so badly he thought overdosing was preferable to a lifetime of rape in prison. And you're trying to tell him no one cares when you cared enough to cause that to happen? You're trying to tell him to get over it and leave the past behind so that the moment his back is turned, you can follow him and make money off him too? Um, I don't know. I don't know how far my abusers are willing to go. And part of the reason why I even started this channel is because I have to genuinely fear that I might go completely missing in the street one day. And you can say what you want about me and caring about my own life, but I know that the people who've done this to me have other victims and that they will move on to take other victims. And don't worry, I am pursuing it more with law enforcement and trying to get a hold of a different cop until someone takes me seriously and I can make a full formal statement, because I know that there are channels of law enforcement in Canada who are good at sniffing this stuff out, even if you don't have a lot of evidence on your side yet. But there comes a certain point where I think about my abusers, and I think about how with organized crime you're supposed to be like smart. Don't get caught. Do whatever you want, but don't get caught. And then I look at the long list of rape and attempted unaliving, attempted self-unaliving, fraud, trafficking, voyeurism, over 15 years that started when I was a child, literally a child around the age of 13 to 14, to now 29, an adult man. And I just want to scream at them, take the win. Go. Go. Take the win and go. 15 years of sex crimes and financial crimes and stalking and psychological and physical abuse. Take the win and go. I don't know how else to say it. The last thing I'll say in this video is a quote that my favorite blogger ages ago, Dear Coke Talk, or Dear Coquette, her blogs are still up even though she doesn't update anymore, but in one of her responses, she might have quoted it from someone else, but in one of her responses she said, "The right to die on one's own terms is as constitutional and inalienable as the right to live on one's own terms." And if I'm supposed to live in a constant state of sexual abjection, social isolation, and the illusion of mental illness when really what I'm enduring is trauma and not schizophrenia, then I think I would rather go. So, to all the Canadian Parliament members or politicians who will probably never see this in a million years, I want you to think that by delaying MAID for the next few years, that people like me are stuck in this position until we magically have the hand of God reach out to help us, or a witness be brave enough to speak up. That for some of us, because of how the current legal system works, even in a good country like Canada, our only escape from a lifetime of rape might genuinely be to end the life instead of live it. I want you to know that if you're watching this and if you're in danger, please try and contact the authorities. 988 is a mental crisis support line. I'm not endorsing the end of life for anyone, and I'm not saying it should be a first priority, and I'm not saying it's the preferable priority. But we're not talking about self unaliving here. We're talking about MAID as a medical procedure. And in terms of discussing things openly on social media, I might not be allowed to encourage others to self harm because I would never ever do that, but I am allowed to consider and discuss MAID as a medical procedure, which is what this channel is about. So stay safe, and I hope that everyone watching this is safe, and I hope everything goes good for you.